Welcome to this video on making timesheet corrections with Progressus Advanced Projects. The purpose of this video is to demonstrate how to do corrections to timesheets when the timesheet has been submitted and has lines in various states of billing. Timesheets may be reopened if they contain lines that are associated with a posted or unposted sales invoice. Reopening the timesheet will reopen every line on the timesheet and will reverse the labor cost entries with the same transaction dates as the original timesheet. Reposting of the corrected timesheet will result in entries posted for labor cost with the date of the timesheet. To demonstrate this, we'll have one timesheet that contains one timesheet line that has been fully invoiced, one that has been partially invoiced, one that is on an unposted sales invoice, and one that has no billing activity. Then we'll reopen the timesheet to show how the entries look in the invoice suggestion page and the project ledger. The timesheet has been submitted, approved, and posted. The entries are all set to chargeable, and we use the invoice suggestion page to invoice the entries as shown here. We'll then use the Reopen Timesheet option in the Timesheet Periods list page to reopen the timesheet. Let's look at the project ledger entries that were created from the posted time entries. The project ledger entries are all chargeable, and the open is true. After the timesheet is reopened, the system will reverse these entries by creating negative transactions. Now, let's go to the invoice suggestion page. First, we'll fully invoice the 8 hours with a total price of $1,200. Then, we'll post the invoice. Since the first line is fully invoiced, it's no longer showing here. Next, we'll partially invoice the sales line for a quantity of 4 and a value of $600, and then post the invoice. For the second line, which is partially invoiced, there's still a quantity of 3 to invoice, and amount of remaining of $450. That's why it still displays in the invoice suggestions. The next step is to create an invoice for the third line, but we'll not post it. The invoice shows $900 total price, and the created document number is updated here with the invoice number just created. For the last line, we won't charge or invoice anything. To recap, the first line is fully invoiced, the second is partially invoiced, and the third line is invoiced but not posted. That last line is unchanged. Next, we'll look at the project ledger entries that were created. We have 2 sale entries for the first 2 entries that were invoiced. The first line is for the time entry where we invoice and posted a full quantity for 8, and negative 8 hours represents the transaction created by the posted invoice. For the second time entry, which was partially invoiced, we have a line with the quantity of 7 that was invoiced, and negative 4 hours represents the transaction created by the posted invoice. Notice that there is a remaining quantity of 3. The third line for quantity of 6 and the fourth line for quantity of 5 do not have posted invoices, so we only see the positive quantities from the timesheet. For the third line, it shows the quantity of 6, which is the third time entry we invoiced on the sales invoice but didn't post. The line for quantity of 5 is for the time entry that we didn't change or invoice. It's important to note that even though nothing is changed or invoiced on that last line, when we reopen the timesheet, that line will be processed just like the other lines. It can be either closed or invoiced later. Now let's reopen the timesheet. We'll navigate back to Resources, highlight the resource used for the time entries, and select Actions, Time, Timesheet Entry. Highlight the timesheet to be reopened and select Reopen Timesheet from the menu. Because the timesheet is posted, you'll receive a message, Timesheet has been posted and is in the project ledger. Do you want to reverse? Click Yes. The time entry status now shows it's reopened. The timesheet shows the hours are 8, 7, 6, and 5 respectively. Let's review the project ledger entries created from the reopened timesheet. The ledger entries outlined in green are the negative entries from the timesheet reopen. The negative entries in orange are entries from the sales invoice posting and existed prior to the reopen. You can see the remaining amount to be invoiced. For example, we had the quantity of 7 and already billed for 4, so there's a remaining quantity of 3 on line 3. The project ledger entries that were originally posted are reversed. Let's look at the invoice suggestion lines. The reopen of the timesheet created the negative 8 hours because it was on the posted invoice. The positive 7 hours is the original timesheet posting that has been partially invoiced and has 3 remaining to invoice. The negative 7 hours were created with the timesheet reopen. The positive 6 hours are from the original timesheet and are still left on the draft invoice. The negative 6 hours is from the timesheet reopen. The user can invoice these lines from Invoice Suggestions. However, if they prefer to close them, check the Close Line field for the appropriate lines. Then choose Close Invoice Lines from the menu at the top of the page, and the records will be removed from Invoice Suggestions and will be closed. Thank you for viewing this video on the effects of reopening a timesheet with fully invoiced time entry lines, partially invoiced time entry lines, invoiced but not posted time entry lines, or time entry lines that are not changed.